My past with Fairy Tail is actually a very interesting one, as I was originally reading Rave Master. That was my big thing back in the day. And I read that pretty much from start to finish, even if it took some dubious means to do so. And I actually have, out of all the manga I physically have, the most of Rave Master volumes. That's how into Rave Master I really was back in the day. And so when I heard that Hiro Mashima was coming out with a new manga series, I was fully on board because I was really just that in love with Rave Master. And as the series came out, I was, of course, naturally enthralled. Something about how Hiro Mashima writes stories always gets you initially engaged with it. It's just, I don't know what it is, but he can just pitch a story and somehow it just kind of hooks you for some reason. And when I started off with the Macau arc, being introduced to Lucy, Happy, Natsu, it was actually pretty fun. And the idea of having a guild that was this close knit family was also very fascinating as well. Especially because around the time I had gotten in with a group of friends and we had kind of become almost like a team. Like, we'd always hang out, always go out to do something. Like, if we planned anything, it was all of us together. We had a meeting place, all that good stuff. So the series really resonated with me, and it felt very similar to One Piece to a certain degree, mostly in the idea of people coming together and being a kind of found family in that capacity. And you got stuff like the Break arc, where they dealt with Duke Everloo and his whole situation. And that was where we started to kind of get into the heart of the series. That was pretty nice. But the real arc that really kind of solidified where things went was the Eisenwald arc, where you were introduced to Urza and Gray. Gray was awesome because he kind of reminded me of Silva from Rave Master, who controlled silver and metallic stuff. And so Gray was basically that with ice. And Urza was just in a league of her own, but I love the fact that a lot of her armors, at least earlier on, were representative of Hero's other work, Rave Master, where you had the special sword that could transform, but she was able to transform out her armor and all of that. And so they were dealing with this dark guild who were trying to, kill the Magic Council and all that, or these high-ranking magical officials. That was fascinating. And then we got to the Leon arc and we got into Gray's backstory, and that Gray's backstory really tugged on my emotional string. And, that really started to get my sympathy up for this series. It was really starting to shine. And then you got the big showdown with the Phantom Lord arc, where it was guild versus guild, and you were introduced to Gajeel, and oh man, I thought Gajeel was like the wickedest guy around. Being able to control and turn himself into metal, that was awesome. All in order to track down Lucy because her past had come up to get her. And I love Lucy's ability too, where she's basically a summoner, unlocks these creatures in associated with the Zodiac and all that. And I love that in concept, but Lucy never really got enough of a solid storyline. Mashima really loved Natsu and his wild identity. Haru, his previous protagonist, he was kind of subdued in his personality. He was just standard hero guy. Whereas Natsu, he just went in the complete opposite direction. He was a ruffian, he was a troublemaker, the whole shebang, and that was pretty fun. But the Phantom Lord arc really did introduce what would be a lot of the other core members of Fairy Tail with Gajeel and Juvia. Really fun characters. And that really was, by this point, my love for Fairy Tail was solidified. And then you got the Loki arc, and you find out about Loki and his backstory, which it really was very nice little moments. But oof, the Tower of Heaven arc, that was the hardcore one. Because you get into Urza's backstory with Jalal Fernandez and how she was previously a slave, forced to build this tower, and all the rough life that she had lived and the people she had lost, and it was terrible. That was the real, like, shake up story arc because it was such a desperate moment. But at the same time, it was a moment where you think certain people are going to die, but they don't. And it's always kind of debatable, was it good that certain people didn't die during the course of that story? Because it started to feel like, oh, maybe no one dies in this series. And then you got to the Battle of Fairy Tail with Laxus and the Thunder Guard tribe. Fairly decent story arc with Laxus trying to take control of Fairy Tail. The Oreshion Says arc, which my feelings towards the Oreshion Says, because you had that in Rave Master as well, but the Oreshion Says here are a lot more noticeable than the Oreshion Says in Rave Master. They were notable to a point, but they were very early on in the series, and once you got past them in Rave Master, it was just kind of like, Oreshion Says, yeah, whatever. And they really did become this reoccurring thing within the series going forward. Like, Hiro Mashima really did love the name Oreshion Says, because I think even in Eden Zero, he has a group called the Oreshion Says too. I'm not sure, I'd have to double check. Yeah, Oreshion Says Galactica. Like, Hiro Mashima just cannot let go of that name. He loves it, and it's just become a staple of his work. But the alliance to take them down of various different guilds of Lamia Scale, Blue Pegasus, Cat Shelter, and the introduction of yet another Dragon Slayer, Wendy, the Wind Dragon Slayer. It was a lot of sympathy there. And then you had the Adolas arc that talked about alternate realities, and you got to learn more about the character of Mist again, and how the other reality was trying to steal the magic of their alternate, which was the place that we know as Earthland. Then you had the Tenryou Island arc, where, the S-Class mage promotion trial was going down, but then in comes Grimoire Heart, which is a dark guild trying to take things over and find Fairy Tail's secret hidden weapon. The 7 years later arc, which I still feel very shaky about that huge gap in time that was passed. I still don't know how to feel about that. The one big arc was the Grand Magic Games arc. Like, that one, you were introduced to so many new characters and so many new guilds, like Sabretooth and Raven's Tail. You got to know guilds that you already knew, like Lamia Scale. Like, it introduced a ton of new characters, all for a constant competition, and everything just went to pot in that one. And then you had the anime-only arc, the Eclipse Celestial Spirits arc, which actually was referenced in the manga because it explains why all of a sudden less celestial spirits, like spirit mages like Lucy, are showing up around the world. And I thought that was actually pretty clever. It didn't really go as deep as it could have, but the fact that Mashima even referenced it in his work was actually very fascinating. Then the Sun Village arc, which starts to lead into another arc called the Tartarus Arc, which is a dark guild, and you start to get into more of the demonic side of the world, and the dark wizard Zareth, who had machinations that are littered throughout the entirety of the series. Honestly, I love how deeply ingrained Zareth's involvement kind of dates back to in the series, because during the Eisenwald Guild arc, you had the object that they were going to use to kill the heads of the magical community was a product of Zareth. During the Leon arc, one of the creatures of Zareth tied into Gray's backstory. The Tower of Heaven arc was being constructed like Urza was in slavery because of the followers of Zareth. I think the Oratian says tied into Zareth, although I'm not actually kind of clear on that. But the Tenryou Island arc, you get your first introduction to Zareth, like fully, like in the flesh. So you start to see things kind of move there. And that's why by the time you started getting towards the Tartarus arc, where things get into high gear, you were met with the demons of Zareth and all that. That was intense stuff. The Avatar story arc wasn't as interesting just because Avatar was just not that interesting of a group, but it was a bridging into the final arc, which was the Alvarez Empire arc, where the forces of Zareth descend upon Fairy Tail and the land that they live in, and so all these guilds have to come together to basically fight an all-out war, which caps off the series before you get into the 100 Years Quest, which I'm covering right now, which hopefully one day will have some kind of OVA-like animation, but it's hard to tell. I mean, nobody's ever come back to animate Ravemaster again. I keep holding out hope, so maybe 100 Years Quest will just remain as a spin-off manga. I don't know. I don't really quite see it becoming its own series, especially since the series as a whole is only released bi-weekly. But even still, bi-weekly is still better than most things, so who knows? Maybe once the 100 Years Quest possibly finishes, then they'll actually try to adapt an animation for it. Maybe get an OVA or something, because it's fairly long. Like, there's still a good chunk of the whole quest that the Fairy Tail group is on to fulfill, and it even follows up a few things from the previous series, which you don't really get too much in a lot of spin-off series. So I mean, it basically picks up where the series left off. Like, I'm still shocked that Hiro Mashima is able to do this, as well as work on Eden Zero, as well as other projects that he's done where he's designing stuff for video games. Like, the man is a machine when it comes to work. And I really just have to applaud what he can do, because it feels impossible. It really does feel impossible in a lot of ways. But Fairy Tail has its ups and downs, and sometimes I've had issues with the plot and where he takes the characters. But as a whole, it's still a fun enough adventure series, and I still love the idea of the guild and all that. Do I wish some of the more minor characters got more of a time to shine? Absolutely. But it's bound to happen. Enough characters get enough time that I should just be satisfied with the little bit that they do get to enjoy. Fairy Tail is a one-in-a-million series that managed to just come onto the scene, attract a ton of people, because I never really thought it would be as popular as it became, but it really did resonate with a lot of people. And for that, I say good on you, Hiro Mashima. Like, you had your one shining series, you had a great series in Ravemaster, a phenomenal series in Fairy Tail, and even Eden Zero is getting a lot of attention. Who can say they've had 3 successful series in a row? Like, there has not been a time when this man has not had a fairly popular series. I don't know, just something about Hiro Mashima that really draws people towards him, much like the guild of Fairy Tail. But tell me your thoughts in the comment section below. Did you read or watch Fairy Tail? Who was your favorite character? What was your favorite story arc? Which magical power would you love to have? Let me know in the comment section below. And if you like this video, please like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for notifications. And until next time, I've been Duuz-Diz-Din, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.